Welcome back to Legal Candy. I am your host, attorney Candice Ross Colucci with the Colucci Law Group. And here is where we are going to unravel some of the intricacies and the legal stuff that you're hearing on the internet. And I'm here with my co-host, two of them today. We have Melissa Center.
Hello.
Hello. And then we have MK.
Hello, everybody.
Our beautiful content producer who has been the reason why all this stuff is put together and organized, and all the information that you're going to see in here today all comes from her research. So the legal disclaimer, nothing we talk about today creates an attorney-client privilege. Just so you know, if you have any questions, reach out to us. If we can't help you, we'll point you in the direction that will. Everything that we talk about today is from the interweb. So if you've got a question on authenticity, please just look it up yourself. So today we are diving into the tragic and controversial Gabby Petito case, a story that gripped the nation and exposed serious questions about police investigatory practices and potential obstruction of justice. We will examine how the law enforcement handled the situation originally, the legal implications of releasing the suspect that ends up ultimately murdering beautiful Gabby, and the allegations that the Brian Laundrie's parents may have been an accomplice to it. So we are going to talk about those things in detail today, and we're not just talking about theories. The public records have given us hard evidence, including notes, text messages, and even a burn after reading letter that Brian Laundrie's, who has been, alleged, and the evidence have shown that he murdered Gabby, and his mother had sent him that letter. So we will go over the timeline of what took place and why this kind of gripped the nation. I always think that's an interesting stuff is, what do we think triggers for why it becomes so huge? So we're in the place right now where a summary of what took place is Gabby Petito was 22 years old. What a baby. When we talk about when they're young,
she looks really young.
So
too.
young. Oh my
and
gosh.
The Netflix special, yeah.
I have a couple little blonde nieces that literally look just like her as far as form-wise. And when you watch the body cam from the police officers when they were investigating the potential domestic violence allegations, when she gets out of that car, it was like watching a child, a little girl get out. She was so petite. This really reads like a movie. Yeah, it really definitely did. She looked very young.
And I have a young daughter, and I'm like, to me, they're very similar.
Yep. Super young. So she's a 22-year-old aspiring, I would say, travel influencer. She's all about that social media world. She had embarked on a cross-country trip with her fiance, Brian Laundrie, in the mid of August 2021. By late August, Gabby was reported missing, triggering a nationwide manhunt. And on September 19th, 2021, her remains were found in Wyoming. So less than a couple months later, after Gabby goes missing, then Brian Laundrie goes missing himself. And his remains are then discovered on October 20th, 2021, here in sunny Florida, in Florida nature reserves. As the investigation unfolded, internal records and leaked communications raised serious questions, not only about police handling, but also about whether Laundrie's parents helped him evade further questioning. So this is on Netflix right now, so it definitely is streaming, and people are talking about it a lot. And I think one of the things always leads to why it becomes such a big deal is, first of all, this is in that sphere of every parent's worst nightmare. This is your nightmare. Your nightmare begins with your daughter dating a boy who then they get a truck and decide to drive cross country in it while she's filming for her wanting to be the social media star.
Which is so foreign to boomers to begin with. And they're like, but how can you make money doing this?
Yes.
Right? It's like this intangible thing.
This whole van life, right? So she gets one of these vans hoping to be viral with this whole concept of, I'm going to film everything of what it's like to live inside of a van and travel across the country.
Was it by a river?
Yeah. I don't know.
I'm joking. Chris Farley reference.
Yes.
Sorry.
Was it by a river? So it definitely had its element of it being every parent's worst nightmare. and she goes missing. And I also think one of the biggest elements too is that you have so much video and of all of this kind of like you get to really intimately see them and what they were like before she goes missing. And then I think the other piece that everybody got attached to was, oh, the police could have potentially had a hand in allowing this murder to happen because they had an opportunity to stop this. So let's go over the timeline of what took place and then really kind of rip apart, did the police do something wrong? And I will tell you, initially when I looked at this, I remember first hearing from the news, everybody was blaming the police departments. We're going, if they would have arrested him then this wouldn't have happened. And when I went back and looked back over it again and really watched the entire full video and got some more background evidence, I have a different view about what I think took place during that time. And I really honestly believe that the police did the best they could under those circumstances when I think a lot of people are really looking at the police, including her family, and saying this is all of their fault.
The officers, they described the incident as a mental health crisis rather than domestic violence.
Yeah.
That's what they saw.
Yep.
That's what their, perception was.
I agree.
So
And I think
can see how,
for sure. But also I think there was some kickback too, and I know that you all will be able to clarify this, but they were also, like, looking back, kind of upset because they offered Brian a place to go stay.
Oh, they were
He
angry.
stated the domestic violence.
They were so angry.
The domestic violence instead
Very
of her,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So,
So let's go over the timeline because then it will all kind of come together. So on June 2021, that is when this crossroad trip began. So you've got Brian Laundrie and you've got Gabby that are on their way across the United States with a plan to film this so they can become social media stars. And they have this white 2012 Ford Transit van that they decide they're going to build out and live out of. And so they're on their way. And here's where the first sign of trouble happens. To me, one of the biggest things that take place in this case that sparked it for me was that on August 12, 2021, a witness calls 911 after seeing Brian. What they say is that they saw a guy slapping a girl, and that they were driving a vehicle, and they described the vehicle, and they were near Moonflower Co-op in Utah. So they're in Utah. And a lot of times what I actually liked about this was it's when you really do the Monday morning quarterback for murders and investigations and those kind of things, it's interesting to me when you see all the pieces kind of come together and all the people you didn't know were watching, all the people who caught you on video camera, like when they really are able to get all of the pieces together, it's interesting to see how it all comes together. So one of the things is people call 911 all the time for suspicious behavior and then nothing ever happens for it. So for that call to be made and then the cops actually not too long after find the vehicle and they're following the vehicle on the highway. And then it ends up actually, I think he swerves a couple of times and kind of goes off the road. And then they put their lights on and they pull them over. And that is the video that becomes viral, is the cop cam videos, which I've always been a fan of every police officer having.
Same.
And let me tell you, officers, to me, the fact they had body cams on and recorded this, to me, was imperative. Because had they not recorded it, I would have clearly have said as an attorney, you should probably file a wrongful death lawsuit against the police departments that were involved in this. Because you wouldn't really know what happened, because eventually both of them end up dead, unfortunately. But that video becomes the best evidence in defense of the police department, who, in my opinion, as an attorney who did criminal defense, I'll tell you, it's very difficult for the police officers to know what to do in that moment, right? They've got to make those discretionary decisions a lot of times. And I thought they did a lot of weighing their options, of figuring out what's the best incidence of what to happen. So they get a 911 call that there's a man slapping a girl. That's all the 911 call says, right? That it's a man slapping a girl. So when they stop the video and you can see what takes place from these body cams is, and my vision of what of my opinion of kind of what you can see is, they pull over. As soon as they walk up to the passenger side, Gabby is hysterically crying. She is very, very visibly upset. And when what they do is what they're supposed to do is they take her out. They have him take his keys out of his ignition so he doesn't run. They take the keys. He's very calm and collected, and kind of explaining what take place. And she gets taken over to the side, which is what they are absolutely supposed to do if there's any allegations of a domestic violence. The reason why they're there is because they believe that he was hitting her. That's the only information that they have.
The aggressor, right?
But what happens during their investigation is that Gabby technically takes full responsibility.
Yeah.
She admits and says that she was the aggressor.
Mm-hmm.
He says the same thing. Their stories pretty kind of align in a lot of areas. Both of them are saying that she was the one who was the aggressor. She admits to hitting him, slapping him, hitting him while he's driving. That's the reason why he started swerving there, is because she says that she was hitting him. And these are some of the notes that I took from the video watching it that I really looked at it differently. What I thought was interesting was I think there was 3 different cop vehicles there and 2 different actual jurisdictions. That was then also MK? There's different types of police officers there. It looked like there was a state police officer and potentially maybe a different. Looks like there's a different jurisdiction, and so they were all really trying to figure out what should they do. And you listen to these officers who talk by themselves away from them after they interview them,
like more candidly,
to figure out what to do. Mm-hmm. And it actually, when you watch it, it watches to me like a informational training video for police officers. Mm-hmm. So for me, as an attorney who can clearly blame a police officer, I have instances where I've said this is the police officer's fault. In this instance, I don't blame any of them because they didn't really have another option, and here's why. If they go to investigate and both people are saying she's the aggressor, and he is admitting that he says he pushed her out in the open to get her away from him, it does contradict with what the witness, who has no vested interest, that's the only thing to me that really triggered there's something else going on here. It's not uncommon for a woman who is potentially a victim of a crime to take responsibility of the crime because she's afraid of what this abuser may potentially do.
Yeah.
And they say that his behavior with the officers showed like a textbook example of gaslighting and Darvo, the deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. Yeah. When he denied any wrongdoing and he kind of played that whole playbook like by the letter. Yeah. With those officers.
And what I also think of is so, remarkable about the investigation we're able to do now afterwards is when they're able to get all of their text messages, which I believe text messages between 2 people, especially lovers, are the most telling things that it can ever happen in your relationship. It really is your text message between the 2. And so what I believe in regards to both of them, and I know my opinion's probably not the most kind of maybe sought after opinion, I would imagine, but I don't think he was ever abusive to her before, because I do believe if he had been, she would have written those in text messages. So if you have been abused before and you are in an argument with that person and you're going back to him or whatever, there will be a text message thread somewhere where you're like, listen, I'll come back as long as you don't hit me again. You know what I mean? It exists somewhere.
Or and even if not that, but even like the person falling all over themselves to apologize. I'll never do that. I'll never do it again.
Never hit you again. I didn't mean to hit you.
There's going to be a trace of something.
And the fact to me that never surfaced, because they went through their text messages, and what they did find in the text messages were where she does clearly says, I love you, but you can't speak to me that way. Right. So it does look to me like I do believe that she probably was an adorable little thing that when they get into it, she probably does get a little handsy. I actually I really truly believe that whatever has taken place to them in the 2 years they dated. So I guess they were high school sweethearts or something, and then they dated for 2 years when this all happened because they're both very young. I don't believe that there's potentially a history of domestic violence there. And so when they're investigating, the police officers investigate, they get both the stories. And at that point in time, an officer, that's what they have to go after. They have a 911 phone call that if the person didn't leave their identity and they didn't, I believe they probably could have maybe called the guy, those people back later on while they were there investigating, but they don't normally ever do that. You get two people telling you a story, and it becomes very difficult for police officers to figure out, what do we do now? And let me tell you why it becomes difficult. Because here's what happens, this is the quote from some of those officers, is that she admits to being the aggressor, and this is what one of the officers says. How far do you want to go with this? The reason they don't give us discretion is because women keep going back and forth, and it gets worse, and they end up dead. So the officer was saying that's why they don't give us discretion. And when we come to a domestic violence and we are sure who the aggressor is, we're supposed to not have discretion, and we're supposed to arrest that person. That is what the officer's talking about. He says they don't give us discretion, and if we're clear that we know who the aggressor is, we are supposed to arrest that person. So that's what he's saying. Then he says, but in no way, shape, or form do I believe that this will regress and he will become a battered man. But I don't have a crystal ball. So the officers at that point in time are all under the impression, have all now said, she's saying she's aggressor. So our options here, that's what they say, our options here are like this. We arrest her for domestic violence because they have both admitted that she has committed domestic violence. We have to be arresting her for it. Or we let them go. We let them both go because they're saying that they're fine now, and she's saying she has anxiety and she doesn't want to be away from him and all that stuff. We just let them go. And then, so that's what the officer also says. We could either follow the letter of the law and essentially arrest her for domestic assault. That's what they say. The letter of the law would have been for them arresting her for domestic violence.
Could
this little girl.
Imagine the public outcry, though? Like, looking at the chain of events, like, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah.
If they arrested her.
Yeah.
And they've already received this weight of backlash.
Yeah.
For not taking him.
Yeah.
Just from you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh.
So that's what one of the officers says. And I think it was interesting in the video is that a woman officer says, this is what she says, quote, because they're figuring out what to do. What do we do? Do we arrest her? They are not saying anything about arresting him. You guys have got to understand, at that point in time, it would be madness. You cannot look at what happens afterwards to go back to that moment of what they should have done. It turns out horrific. Yes, it does. But in that exact moment, those officers could not have arrested him. They had nothing to arrest him. They can't. If they had arrested him, he would have his own lawsuit against the city himself. Yeah. Because for a wrongful arrest, they don't have probable cause to arrest him because they both admitted that she was the one who was the aggressor. So at that point in time, they cannot arrest him. They only can arrest her. That's the only option that they have at that point in time. If they're going to arrest somebody, it would be to arrest her. This is what the woman cop says, because the woman cop probably feels something else is going on here. She says, I'd rather be dinged for the decision I made than the decision I didn't make. That's what she says. So her opinion is that, and this is the thing is, I think when she says that, is she's feeling like that there's way more to this, and maybe we should arrest her so then she's at least away from him. And this is why the other officer responds and gives another option. At that point in time, it was only arrest her or let them both go. Then he says, another option is to not charge them. We separate them for the night, and if they find each other again, then what is it to you? You separated them, and you provided for his safety. That is what they said. That is what they said. I have goosebumps thinking about it, because then my mind gets blown. I'm telling you, as a criminal defense attorney and as a mother, that in that moment, what these officers did, I thank them, because they went above and beyond their call of duty. They were contemplating what to do. They were talking to her. They were talking to him. Then they were weighing out their options. I don't know if you guys think you see that on a normal basis. It doesn't happen.
No, and
they shoot first, ask question later sometimes. You know, there's no contemplating. And not only did they contemplate, they did something I have never seen an officer ever do. Don't know if it's in their budget. But then they literally tell him, Brian Laundrie, that we're going to get the hotel for you. We're going to pay for it for you. And they pay for this hotel for him to go here. And there's another question people ask too, and they get very confused about was, why did they allow him to go to a hotel and they allowed her to take the van? And it's because she made that a big deal. The car is registered in her name. The van is registered in her name, so it's her vehicle. And I believed the most dangerous thing for a woman who's traveling cross country is to not have a vehicle. That is so dangerous. So they made the right decision by going, we can't put both of them in the same hotel. That's not what we're planning on doing. And we find out later on this is a specific hotel that they put other battered victims in. They do this commonly, I guess. And so the other option is they say that you can take the vehicle that you guys have been living out of, mind you, okay? They have been living out of this vehicle, so it's technically their home. And that way she has a car. She can go wherever she wants. She could have got in that car, turned around, called her mommy, and drove straight back home. That's what she could have done. So they've given her the means by which doing that. They have set perimeters on both of them. They told them, don't talk to each other. They're watching these two people. She starts hyperventilating, saying, I can't, I have anxiety. I get triple stress. I need to be near him. I need to be near him. So they're also realizing, okay, you know, we also, and that's when they said they thought they were dealing with a mental health crisis. And so they really feel like that was the best option for them at that point in time. And I'm telling you, yes, it ends up badly, but you can't look at that to figure out if the police did what they should have done at that moment, because they did more than they should have done in that moment. What can a police officer do if everybody lies to them, right? Everybody lies to them and they don't have enough. Because here's the other thing I've heard people say. Well, they could have just arrested her. Let me tell you what happens if you get arrested for domestic violence.
That's what I was going to say.
Because what would have happened is, and I'll tell you right now, they would have arrested her for domestic violence if they would have, because that's the only option they would have had at that point in time. It would have been illegal, a wrongful arrest, if they had arrested Brian at that point in time. If they had arrested her, she would have been charged with domestic violence. Then, immediately after, they probably would have dismissed it, or she would have fought and he would have said he doesn't want to press charges because he loves her, and then they would have dismissed it. It still shows up on her record. And at 22 years old, because this does happen to people. She's done, right? That's what people are forgetting about, is that what it would have done to her, a 22-year-old who already had anxiety, stress. I heard people say, well, if they just arrested her, it would have separated them. And nothing. No, it would have just ruined her record in order.
That's the thing I was like chomping at the bit to chime in and say is they did go above and beyond their call to duty in this moment.
I thought so as well.
Because they were like, well, I don't want to wreck this kid's life.
Yeah.
Their whole life in front of them. And if I do take this measure, it's going to be a no-win for anybody.
Yeah.
So how can we circumvent, exactly what you said?
Yeah, above and beyond. I mean, they really did. And even so much to where, and that's why I'm going to say, thank you, officers. I want to put that out there and go, what you did in this instance to me showed humanity, understanding, discretion, where they admitted that if we were following the letter of law, we don't have a discretion. We are supposed to arrest her. And they decided to violate the letter of the law by not arresting her in order to make sure she was okay. And they went as far as to say, which I love this officer, he then pulls her to the side when he's telling her, the situation. And he says to her, there's some places in town where you can pay $4 and you can get a shower. And she's like, I know about it. I've been to one. And he explains to it that, and he literally reiterates this again when he gets into the car, when he's driving Brian to the hotel, which I thought was beautiful, was he says, she reminds me of my wife. My wife gets high, and I'm like, it's got to be heartbreaking for the officers. And I know it's not really about the officers, but the guilt that they probably feel is probably, it's hard to measure it, especially when the public turns against them. And in that instance, this officer says, you remind me of my wife, because she has high anxiety. And when she gets this way, all she needs is a shower.
Yeah.
Like, that's what she needs. And so he felt that he literally not only has given humanity to this girl, but then literally equates her to being his wife. Officers don't do that. You're not driving, they're telling, let me tell you about my life. Let me tell you about my husband. They don't want to tell you anything about their life, let alone for them to go, I'm even taking the extra step because you remind me of my wife. And then he tells Brian, listen, she reminds me of my wife. This is what she needs. You guys take some space. Like, she maybe needs a shower and she should be fine afterwards. Like they really do go
beautiful
above
connection.
and beyond. Yeah. So the answer from a legal perspective, do I believe there's a cause of action against the police department? No. I do not believe that they did anything other than go above and beyond their call of duty. And they actually defied their obligation as attorneys. I mean, as their obligation, they actually defied their obligation as officers in that moment and didn't follow their own protocol and they should have arrested her. And let me tell you, let's just say that it wouldn't have ended as horrible as it did with her being murdered. If they had arrested that little girl at that point in time with the anxiety she was explaining and the stress, could you imagine what that would have done to her mentally? Like, it's hard to even think about. So that is August 12th. So so what the officers did, we believe at that point in time, didn't give them any other option. So on August 19th, Gabby uploads a YouTube video called The Van Life, beginning our journey, appearing happy and engaged with Brian. So that's what you're saying. She only makes one video that she uploads, and that's as far as she gets. She films a lot, but I guess learning how to edit and all that other good stuff with social media takes an amount of time. So that is the 19th is when she uploads that video, and then by August, I think 2027, there are other people who end up saying they see them arguing at a Wyoming restaurant. It's crazy all the people that start coming forward, right? Because it becomes such huge news when she goes missing. And then August 30th, she sends in a text message. This is her final text message where she says that there's no service in Yosemite, and that's technically where she's allegedly kind of near at that point in time.
Both texts were suspicious.
Yeah.
Because the one, can you help Stan, was referring
on the
to, and
27th
we'll find
too.
out later that she didn't send those texts.
Yeah. So August 27th, there's another weird text that the family doesn't believe really came from her. And so the mom, who she's very close with, she's the one who reports her daughter missing by using social media. She puts a picture of her up there, and you learn that this van community, camping community,
van lifers,
they're very close people. They all know each other.
And they're all a part of the puzzle pieces we were talking about, because
they put it all together. Yeah.
They were like, oh my gosh, we saw the van right there.
Couldn't believe it. I can't believe what ends up coming forward afterwards. Once people know that once it becomes viral.
Me chills. Like, that's the good part, the meat and potatoes of community, right? Like the ones that do show up and come out for the benefit of the community, right? To help satisfy these needs.
Yeah. So Gabby's missing. It becomes viral. The whole world's trying to find this girl, and this is when I think takes the biggest turn, when people are like, wait a second, what's happening? So by September 1st, Brian Laundrie has returned back to his parents' home in Northport, Florida. Know that area very well. We have a law firm near there. Northport, Florida got hit pretty bad during a hurricane, and so we love Northport. It's a beautiful place. And so he returns home, and he is driving Gabby's van. He doesn't notify the police or notify Gabby's family. And so...
Didn't they just happen upon it, too, at the house? Like...
The what?
The van. at Brian's parents.
Oh, when the officers get there?
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
they're not sure. So
I'm
nobody,
jumping ahead.
you're
I'm
right.
Sorry, yeah.
So when the officers get there to investigate, they don't know where the van is. They don't know any of that kind of stuff. So they just go there because Gabby's parents call and they make an official police report in New York. This is what I thought was the only sad part about Florida, was this kind of in the Netflix film when they're showing this scene. I was like, Florida, come on, that's not cool. Because what happens is that New York is who takes the complaint from Gabby's mother, and they literally file as a missing person, and then they coordinate with the Northport Police Department because they know that his family lives there, and that's where they are under the impression he probably is at, that he would probably have went home. So Florida police officers go to the house and they knock on the door. They asked us if they've seen, Brian and Gabby.
Polite.
Yeah,
Like-
yeah. They asked if they've seen. He says Gabrielle, by the way. He does not.
I know
say.
that drove me
too.
nuts.
I'm like,
because there was
it's a-
several
yeah,
times, and I'm like,
Yeah, it's
Well, that was
yeah.
her given name.
Well,
Gabriel.
No,
Gabrielle.
Gabrielle is her name.
Gabrielle,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's Gabrielle.
But they-
I'm like, well, that's a boy.
You
but-
guys don't know.
Yeah. So the parents respond in a very, very, very
oh, they
just
were
abnormal way.
lawyered up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we've always said this, just because somebody gets a lawyer
Mhm.
doesn't mean they're guilty. But let me tell you what. In that instance, the way that it was explained and the facts and the manner upon which he's gotten a lawyer obviously shows he was guilty, because
yes.
obviously something has happened. Now, if you're being investigated for a crime, it is not a bad idea to get a lawyer.
I'm calling Colucci Law
Yeah,
Group.
exactly.
I don't know
Always
where to
lawyer
look
up.
this
But in this instance, all they're trying to figure out is where Gabby's at. He was last known to be with her. He
Mhm.
shows up to his parents' house without the van. And then
No,
when
with
they
the
ask,
van.
with the van. Then when the police officers ask the parents about where Gabby's at, they're like, we don't know where Gabby's at. Our son's not speaking. We speaking to you. We have a lawyer.
They
We'll
didn't
give
even
you our
know he
lawyer's
was
phones.
there.
Oh yeah,
It was
we're
a
saying he's not
surprise
speaking.
to the police officers, and they were like, well, is Brian even here? Yes, he's here, and he's not speaking to you.
Yeah, it was.
Call our attorney.
It was so suspicious because at that point in time, she's just missing. Nobody knows where she's at.
Mhm.
At least explain the last things that you knew, unless you know something potentially
yeah, and the
unsavory
officers
took place.
were pleading
What
with
would you
them.
need?
Could they
A
have
lawyer
got a
for it.
warrant? Could they have got a warrant at that time because
Absolutely.
of the suspicious behavior?
No, here's
That's
Here's
because
what they
then
could
the
have
cop
gotten.
came back and he was like, "Let me try and talk to him too."
Yeah,
and they were
pleading,
still.
like, as a
It depends
parent.
on what. So what I didn't like is the officer goes back and is talking to the detective in New York, and then goes, well, I don't really. He pretty much he kind of insults New York. Pretty much he's
Mhm.
like, well, what do you want me to do about it?
Yeah.
This is what they're saying. And at that point in time, you already knew, they admitted that was, you figured out that was Gabby's vehicle. That is suspicion enough.
Mhm.
Her vehicle is there that she had, that she's been missing, and now he's not
And they
explaining anything to
impounded
you.
it.
So to me, there's at least a good
Do you even
level of
need a warrant,
suspicion.
or is
Yeah,
that
no.
enough?
You're not
proof
gonna you're not gonna be able to
search?
go into the house. You won't be
Mhm.
able to do that. But all they needed was technically they needed enough information if they wanted to really do it right. They could have towed the vehicle, which I guess they eventually do.
They did.
But it's not that easy to even get all of the proper documentation to even do any of that, because since she's not available, you would need her next of kin to be the one who demands the car to be towed. Okay.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, you would need legal documents that they're the next of kin, because technically she's just missing. She hasn't been declared dead yet. So it really is a hard kind of concept of what the cops can do legally there. But I just didn't like that the officer then makes a comment and he goes, listen, that wouldn't even have been enough for us to file a missing person. I'm like, you just heard all that, and that wouldn't have been enough for you to realize that there's probably something that has taken
and they
place
were
here?
able to tow the van because it wasn't even initially. I believe the parents said they both owned it, right? Like they
Yeah,
were both on the
they said
title,
they
but
both
they were like, "No, we're going to
lied.
go ahead and tow it
Yeah.
because it belongs to her."
Yeah.
And
that's a
Brian's
lying
not
to a police
registered to it.
officer.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, they probably didn't know who was owned
Yeah,
by
on
him,
it.
I just
but I'll
thought they
tell you,
But that was
so
the grounds for them to
shifty.
tow.
nonchalant about it.
Yeah.
They were
the
definitely.
parents were like,
I think
Oh,
that
they were
I
on the
would have just not
defense from
answered
the
the door
gate.
if I was going to say that. I'm just like, I don't know if there's anything worse than what you end up saying than to say that. I'll just say we've got no comment. Talk to our
Attorney.
Talk to our attorney. I'm just like,
Oh,
it's just.
well, they're not going to answer
Buzz.
at 11 o'clock
Yes,
at
we goes,
night.
They're not going to answer. Can you just tell us something about where she's at? And the parents do send text messages to Brian's family. That looks like that the mother gets blocked. I think she says the text message doesn't go through, ends up going through green on an iPhone. And they never respond to to Gabby's parents. And they eventually, they tow the vehicle and they start really watching what these parents are doing because they're also really trying to figure out where is Brian at. What I thought was interesting is that the person who talks the most in this entire situation is Brian's sister. I'm imagining there must be some kind of turmoil that's happening there because she is the one who gives the most information. She's outside like being like, I'll tell you what I know. Here's what he said. Here's what he did. And I didn't love the text message exchange between, that's why I think text messages, I'm always about be careful what you put in writing, but the text message exchange between the sister of Brian and his mother, when I guess the police officers had to admit that they accidentally thought that at some point they thought they were tailing and following Brian, but they were actually following his mother.
Yes.
And they ended up
and they did
thinking it was funny. Yeah, they ended up thinking that it was funny. And that's the only thing to me is those are such huge indicators to me, is what are people saying when nobody's listening or watching? That is usually indicative. And that's why I say in a murder investigation, the text messages really are everything. A lot of investigation come down to text messages because there is an honesty in text messages that do not exist in almost anything else because no one else is watching. Why would you be saying things that are not true? And it's usually a very good indicator of how you feel.
Response.
Yeah. Now, can they be misinterpreted? Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Say it all the time. They can be misinterpreted. But they really are usually an indicator to see what somebody's usually kind of where
almost
their mindset's
like a stream of consciousness falling out into communication, but untethered by nuance and stuff.
Yeah. So what we do find out afterwards is that they're going to all the parks that she went to, and they've got crews out there all looking, and then their best evidence ends up coming from, the van community sends an alert out asking, did anybody happen to capture video or any information about the van, about these people? Did you see them anywhere? And someone had a video of where the van was at. But the part that I thought was interesting is what you find out about the timeline is that, and you gotta love everybody who thinks that they've watched enough crime shows and think they can commit the best murder. No. That's what this looked like to me. I'm watching him going, have you watched anything? Your phones ping on different towers, and that's how we can triangulate where you're at. So we got an idea of what area you're in. When you send a text message, receive a text message, let me tell you, people try to turn off their phones. That doesn't work either. Your phone's off. We can still figure out where you're potentially at. And so he really thought he had this kind of whole thing figured out. So what we know is that he is the one who sends these last text messages. He also, which I just thought horrible, he Venmos himself money. And why I think he did that.
$700. When they found that, I wanted to ask you, that's when they were able to charge and file for a crime. That was what triggered it right there.
One of the main, so at that point in time, he's technically committed mail fraud, but that gives them the really obvious probable cause that something has been gone awry and that there's a crime here. And that's really because there is two crimes happening. At that point in time, there's suspicion of murder or some type of suspicious of some type of criminal activity. But there's also a crime of mail fraud. Like he's now sending money to himself from someone else's phone.
You were saying her debit card to get gas prior to all of that.
Yes. So that really now rises to the level of he definitely at that point in time was would have been at that point in time needed to have been charged. So what happens is when they're trying to follow him and figure out where he's at, they lose him. They ended up not knowing where Brian's at for a while. And then this whole entire thing takes place where they've lost him so much to where Brian has taken his mother's car and taken it to another reserve, some type of park somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And he leaves the car there because we find out he has committed suicide there. He shoots himself in the head. And then what's interesting is that his parents figure out, because they get a call that the car, so the police officers this is how much the wires are not crossing.
Mm-hmm.
She gets notification that they're ticketing the vehicle that is now in an abandoned, it's now abandoned in a
They
park.
were surveilling
parking lot.
that entire house.
And
Like
the
a
officers don't know
pay-by-lot.
about this. Yeah, the
Mhm.
officers don't even know about it. So that's what triggers to the mom that, oh my gosh, I need to go there. So she goes there, gets the vehicle, comes back, and brings the vehicle back home. And I think that's what sparks it for her, that something is really wrong. My son's obviously, now he's missing. And so she ends up, she's the one who takes everybody to the body. She and her husband end up
It took them
going in a
45
vehicle.
minutes.
Yeah,
And
they
there was
go in
that
a vehicle.
big manhunt, and
Yeah.
they were like, "Yeah, we know what he
Yeah.
likes to do."
Yeah. Yep. So then they go there and they
Sketchy.
find their son who has shot himself in the head. What we find out about the cause of death for Gabby is that and that's what I thought was interesting, and I didn't really like this part of it, was, and I hadn't really found any other evidence to the contrary, was that in the Netflix special, they said that the cause of death was strangulation
And
blunt force trauma.
Yeah.
But I pulled up the death certificate, and what it says on there as the cause of death is strangulation. It does not say that she had blunt force trauma as the cause of death at all. It says strangulation.
Only.
Yes. They find Gabby. So sad. They find her. She's like on her side. She has a sweater on. It looks like they said that the crime, it looked like it had been staged, that it
With
looked like
her
there had been a
boots beside her
Yeah.
and a burn.
yeah, that she had been burning, some looked like there had been a fire there, and then her boots are sitting right there beside her. And so what I think was just so crazy about the world as everyone's watching is that we do get addicted to things that seem sensationalized and things that seem like our nightmares. And I really think this is one of those areas where I think every parent was so fearful of this exactly ever happening to their child, and then feeling like they have no control, and then they go
Yeah.
missing. This is your nightmare of what takes place. Like, this is what you threaten your children with all the time. You're like, listen, you're going to go with him on a trip cross country. You're going to go missing, and then I'm going to have to figure out where you're at. A ditch somewhere on the side of the road naked. That's what my mom used to always tell me. She's like, if you don't listen to me, that's what's going to happen to you. And that's really what this is. And seeing her parents, and I remember when we watched them originally, when they put out their pleas, looking for her. And I think it's an interesting part about what each of these parents were doing, and the question of what would you do? So at this time, there was a lot of backlash against Brian Laundrie's parents. And so I think we talked about that there was a letter from Brian Laundrie's mother that said, burn after reading. And in essence, what she says is, besides to tell her son, please burn this after you read it, which he doesn't do, is she tells him that I will stand behind you no matter what you've done.
Yeah.
And I will, if you need me to help hide a body, I'll bring a shovel. And all of these things.
If you're in jail, I'll make you a sandwich with a file in it.
Yep. And so and it kind of left that question to a lot of parents, like, what would you do if you were in that exact scenario? And I tell people, first of all, you have to, and this was a question that somebody asked me too about being an attorney. How would you defend people if you think that they're guilty? And here's what I'll tell you. Most people who commit crimes don't admit to them to anyone. They make excuses for exactly what happened. When you hire a lawyer, even if you committed a crime, they're not telling their lawyer they committed it. That's not what they're doing. They've crafted a story that it's our job as lawyers to figure out whose story's right. Is it your clients or is it the state attorney's story? And I'll tell you where the truth is. It is somewhere in the middle. That's what happens most of the time. But your clients don't come to you and go, hey, I need you to protect me. I committed this crime. OJ didn't call his lawyers and say, Robert Kardashian, listen, I killed her. What can you do? That's not it at all. That's not what they do.
Shrink the glove.
Yeah,
No.
they make up all kinds of stories. Like, it's one of the things I hated the most about criminal defense was when your clients lie to you. I cannot stand that. How do you defend somebody that's lying to you? But in this instance, I don't think you can truly judge this mother unless you know what he said to her, of what he told her took place. And what we do know is that when the timeline, when the timeline came out, what we know is that, and this is what I also think happened, but we know that allegedly, probably after, when he's pinged near her, when he murdered her, he calls his mother. He's on the phone with his mommy for 55 minutes. Then after that, there's a call, several calls between them, his mother and dad. And then not too long after, they call a lawyer, give him a retainer, and now they're on their way of protecting their son.
The retainer, though, was what really stuck out to me.
Yep.
Because it was like a $25,000 retainer.
Is that how much they said it was? I didn't even know if
yes,
$25,000
is
a lot.
For a pretty substantial
that would be
case
for a
they're
murder.
trying to get out in
$3
front
million
of.
settlement. I'm like, where did they come up with $3 million? So maybe they had a little bit of.
No, they don't even make. I'm sure.
No?
I don't even, and I don't know.
I did. I'm like,
but how do you find? Some of these times you hear numbers online, and I'll tell you, a lot of this stuff is not. I don't know if you can believe any of it's true. First of all, if they reached a settlement with the family, which they did, it would be a confidential settlement. So neither party is allowed to divulge it. Also, if you're paying a retainer for a lawyer, that's also can be protected.
Who is in Wyoming, because that's where it happened. Again, as stated before, I am no attorney, but allegedly it was a $25,000 retainer, and that stuck out to me.
That's quite a bit.
Because I was like, well, what kind of attorney needs that kind of retainer? It's going to be a pretty substantial case, like a murder.
Yeah.
Unaliving somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
To get out in front of it.
So it looks like that a judge awarded the Petito family $3 million in 2022. So it did get settled. So which means it probably got settled and then it got confirmed from the judge of $3 million. Who knows where? I'd love to know, where did that money come from? Who has it? I mean, at this point in time, it'd be interesting. But here's why I also just didn't really understand. Gabby's family files a wrongful death lawsuit against Brian Laundrie's family. How are they responsible for the actual death? What they did allegedly and were potentially responsible for is really, it's impeding the investigation. That's honestly what they may have done. Okay. I don't even know if I'd say that. I don't know what the parents did. You have no obligation, make this very clear. You have no legal obligation to ever tattletale on somebody else. You don't have to do that.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that. So they didn't have a legal obligation to tell the officers what their son told them or anything. What they can't do is take actions that impede the investigation. That's where the crime is. If they hide the body, if they hide evidence, if they're doing those things, they're allowed to keep their son inside their house until he's actually been charged with a crime. Once he's been charged with a felony, it is a crime to harbor a fugitive. So
and that's what the lawsuit was. They filed a lawsuit that claimed that Brian's parents assisted their son in covering up Gabby's murder, and they were planning to help him flee the country.
Yeah, but the thing is like that's so crazy because that's not a wrongful death lawsuit. That's not wrongful death. That is a civil lawsuit for other things, those other causes of action, which truly, what are the damages? But a little bit more pain and suffering. I mean, how long?
They sought $100,000 in damages for mental anguish in that one.
Yeah, that's what it'd be. It'd be the mental anguish of them potentially prolonging any information they may have had that they withheld or impeded. I mean,
right. Like, and wouldn't it be for my thought pattern, wouldn't it be impeding the investigation by withholding Brian because he ultimately was the only one who could provide testimony?
Not until he'd been charged with the crime.
Got it.
That's the crime. It's harboring a fugitive that has been charged with the crime. That is what you can do. But until then, no, you don't have any obligation. You do not. You can always say, I am refusing to say anything that I know. You have no obligation to do that. Now, what I think took place here, and I know it sounds crazy, and let's go to the letter that he wrote, which I kind of hated the most, was when he comes up with an excuse for what he says took place. It is the most ridiculous excuse I've heard in a long time.
In the notebook.
In his notebook.
Yeah.
So he writes all these letters and before he's about to kill himself. And in his notebook, what he says is that I ended her life. I thought it was merciful. That it was what she wanted. But I see now all the mistakes I made. I panicked. I was in shock. So what he says is, he pretty much says that they were hiking together and that she falls into a cold river and she hurts herself, and that when he goes to pick her up and help her, she's screaming in pain and he can't figure out where it's coming from. This is ridiculous. This is insane. Yeah. What do you think could happen to this person who falls into a river and she's screaming in pain?
Cool, calm, and collected.
Yeah, but wouldn't that align with the blunt force trauma initially reported?
Well, I just think he added too many ridiculous details that it sounds like someone who has a mental problem. It doesn't even line up. If you're going to make up a story,
or if you're lying,
it's even crazier.
Tend to embellish more because you want to add in the.
But you make up something that's actually reasonable. What he says is she was in pain. And instead of me getting in my van and driving her to an emergency room, we're not in the middle of
her misery
we're
with
not
morphine.
in Saudi Arabia where it's going to take us a day and a half to get to an airport. To a hospital. We are literally in just a city. We could get in the van and drive her somewhere. He says, I thought I was being merciful by taking away her pain by strangling her to death. I'm just like, that's your best go-to argument? Like, and why he sends the money to himself, by the way, what I realized was why he tries to stage this entire thing. He sends text messaging, that's kind of normal. But why does he send himself $700?
Yeah, I never got that.
It's because, do you remember her last text messages to Gabby, to her friend, were that this is what takes place at the very end, and this is when I believe I know exactly what happened here. Make no mistake, they were very much in love.
Yes,
very much in love.
I agree with that.
They are young, and here's what I've always said. There is nothing that compares to the type of love you will have when you are young. Before your heart has been broken in several different times, before you have been disappointed to the world, when you're still living in this fantasy that it's going to work out, it is the most intense love that it is likely to end with somebody being harmed when it ends when one person still wants to be together. And that is what I believe happened here. And the very last things of what happens is that she tells Brian, this is what I believe happens. She tells Brian that they must get into a fight again. And she's just like, I need time by myself. She tells her friend, and we know this takes place days before she goes missing, that she tells her best friend that I'm by myself. I'm in the van. Brian agreed to go by himself, so he's camping by himself, so that I can film the vlog by myself, because single females will make more money.
A lot more money.
Doing, making these videos. So I believe she goes off by herself. She probably easily, it's not probably any mystery at all when you're doing this of what is your next stop. Like, I don't think there was anything probably very hidden about these are the stops we're making. So he probably knew exactly where she was. And that's why he starts walking and then he starts hitchhiking in order to get to where she's at. And he's going in order to try, I think he probably said, okay, I'll give you your space. He's probably afraid at that point in time, too, the police are going to come get involved again. So he gives her his space. And then he thinks, just like any relationship that probably is tumultuous, I'm going to go see her. And I'm going to try to see if I can
right and
make
reconcile.
this. Yeah. I'll see if I can make this whole thing right. I do find it suspicious that there isn't a lot of text messages between the two of them while he's on this mission. So it does make me kind of think that he is anticipating that that he may do something he probably is going to regret. I think
beginning premeditation.
Yeah, because it's like in every toxic relationship or volatile relationship, you're usually texting each other. You know what I mean? If I say I need my space and I go somewhere and I'm going in a different city,
like, what are you?
Yeah, it's weird for you to just show up and not text me. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's the only thing that I kind of question that I think didn't really fit so much is that that there really is no text messages that's between them. But I'd have to analyze all their text messages. If I got their text messages for the last year and a half of the relationship, I could tell you everything about them.
Oh, for sure. I feel like
to tell you what I think. Yeah, you
what
have
they
to
did
know.
share with us in the documentary.
And the fact that they don't share a lot of his texts makes me think he probably isn't a big texter. Maybe he performs better in person when he's explaining something to him, you know? So I think that maybe that's why he didn't text her. But I believe he gets dropped off. He doesn't want to get dropped in front of right where she's at. Yeah. And I think that's because I think he's still trying to figure out what's he going to say, how is he going to say, what is he going to do? And maybe he wants to figure out what is she doing? You know, is she just seeing somebody else? Did she meet somebody else? You know, I think that's probably why he would get dropped off and not let her know. And then I truly think that when he found her, she probably made it clear that she didn't want to be with him anymore. She wanted to do this whole thing by herself. And like intense love, he lost it and he strangled her. And let me tell you, strangulation is number one. It is a crime of passion. Yeah. It is a crime of love, of the deepest, darkest types of love, of anger when you have uncontrollable urges. Because he also, I guess he had like a dark side to him. And I think he just lost it in that moment. And he killed her. And the sad part that I always think that kind of was broken to me is that most people who do stuff like this out of a crime of passion, they stay alive and then they make up these crazy stories and they live their life and they go to a trial and they demand that they're not guilty and they have this huge trial that rips everybody apart. And I know people don't see it that way, but I do believe that he loved her so much that he couldn't live without her. And for him to actually go and then take his own life that way, to me, is the ultimate, like, I'm sorry for what I did. Like, and I wish I could take it back and I wish I could have her back. And that's what it seems to me for him to actually do it. You know,
I'm doing this because I can't live one more day without her.
Yeah. And I know it's easy to look at it and go, he's a horrible human being. And I get it. But there is an element of it that is the most tragic type of love that exists between young people. And I think he did, in my opinion, the better option of it to just literally take himself out of the picture and instead of do what so many other people do, which is to drag an entire public and his family through an entire trial. Right. And not technically ever admit anything. Because here's my question is, where's all the evidence? And I don't think that there is any because I think she was probably outside when he found her or he had her come outside and he strangled her outside. So there isn't anything else. So he could have potentially said nothing. It'd only be circumstantial evidence, which wouldn't have probably been enough because if truly she does get moved there, if he hadn't done all those other dumb things where he was like trying to make it look like, you know, something was happening.
That's my whole thing. Like, why stage it to that
an alibi? He was trying.
He
didn't know. Because he
like with a little burn spot.
Why? Because he watched a couple Law and Order episodes, and he's like, I'm gonna get this.
Any sense? It's all nonsensical. Yeah. Like there's nothing that lines up to equate to anything.
Absolutely.
You know.
And so that's what I thought. Thinker. Yeah, when they find him and then they find that letter. I mean, I hate that he writes all that in a way just so when he goes out. But here's what I honestly think is that's the same story he told his parents.
Oh, was my very first thought was this is what made it to where he could look his own mother in
Yeah.
the eyes
Yeah.
again to make it, for lack of a better word, palatable for them
Yeah.
to understand and try to justify to protect him.
Yep.
That he just had to sell some kind of goods to
Yeah.
try to get through the motions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And make it to where his mother, who he knows
But I
loves
think he
him
really believed it. I don't think
tremendously.
he was selling anything. I think he was really
No, he
just
doesn't-
telling them.
He's not delusional. He doesn't
Yeah.
believe that that's what happened.
No.
He doesn't believe that.
No, but
First of all, she's not. They would have been able to determine if her clothes had been wet
yes.
and all those things, and that wasn't it at all. And I thought it was crazy is that when they found her body, they didn't say anything about it's being, it had been, deteriorating or any of those kind of things. They just said it was just kind of like, it was almost like it had just been frozen in that position.
Yeah.
While his
But
body.
his was beyond.
Yeah, it's because of I don't know if it was the weather,
Florida
the
humidity or
Florida. They
something.
were like,
yeah.
it was like they had completely said it was just his entire
Well,
body
it's
had been
higher
just so.
elevation
weird.
too.
Yeah.
In different
It probably is
humidities
the
and,
weather,
like,
yeah. Yeah. So this is definitely my heart goes out to Gabby's parents. But my heart also to a degree goes out to Brian's parents. I mean,
my
I
heart
can't
breaks
imagine
for each one.
Yeah, I can't imagine both sides. It's hard to put yourself in any position because you don't know what he said to his parents that would have caused them to do exactly what they did in that
Mhm.
instance. Because if you are demanding that the answer from his parents should have been, listen, you're not staying here, get out, yell to the cops when they come. Here's what he's told us so far. I mean, then you would be of the opinion going, what's wrong with these parents? Like,
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
what our job is as parents. Our job is to protect our children with our lives. And that is what our main goal on this earth is when we give birth to them. Unfortunately, sometimes those interests of protecting your child fiercely sometimes interacts with someone else's rights. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happens. And it really is truly heartbreaking that it ends this way for both of them who obviously truly loved each other. And I just think it was just one of those relationships that just goes really toxic and bad all of a sudden. And he snaps, and she probably did just tell him that.
It's
I'm
very
done.
reminiscent of, excuse me, almost a Romeo and Juliet.
Do you know that I was going to say Romeo and Juliet?
Really?
And the reason why I said Romeo and Juliet in a way, because I didn't want to say them to like, my head kept on going to Romeo and Juliet because it is that toxic love.
right,
that ends
but
up with
the
both of them dead.
young, like
But that's it.
tumultuous,
Yeah.
that kind of passion
Yeah.
and stuff. Well, oh my gosh, you
Yeah.
know, here I'm faking killing myself, whatever. But then he actually drank the poison. Well, I can't go on, or vice versa, whatever.
Yeah.
And then in the middle of it, right, in the middle of the storm, so to speak,
Yeah.
whenever her parents are reaching out to his parents and they're kind of feuding almost a little bit because they're not wanting to give up any communication or anything in an effort to protect their son, that I wholly agree with you, shared this story so they felt, well, he was acting in mercy. He didn't know what to
Jail is all
do.
this time.
Yeah.
It makes sense to go ahead and get an attorney to kind of direct his steps.
For sure. Yeah, I don't
Because-
believe by
you know what I mean?
any stretch of the imagination that he called his parents and were like, she tried to leave me and I murdered her.
Yeah, no.
Our
Get an
kids will
attorney
lie to
now.
us too. Like he called his mother and he explained this situation
Mm-hmm.
exactly like he's saying here. Explained this entire thing to her, and them not knowing or understanding what took place or anything like that. They're like, okay, we'll get a lawyer. He's like, I'm coming home, and that's what I actually think that happened. And I don't believe, like we said before, is looking at it from a legal perspective is I really don't see anything that the officers did that could be actionable. And truly, I don't really see much that the parents did that were actionable. What I never love about these things, and we've been through this before, is when the actual person who does the crime ends up killing themselves or getting
Mhm.
murdered. I don't love that as human beings, we have to have somebody that takes the fall from this. And I don't
Yeah.
love that because that's what this looked like to me, of like, it's the furthest person from the whole thing. So you can't go after Brian because he kills himself. You can't go after the police department.
Yeah, they did try to sue.
They tried to sue the
Somebody
police.
must be tarred and feathered in front of the community, like a witch hunt.
Yeah.
Almost.
So then the last person you go after is the parents, and this has happened before. We've seen it with school shootings, and that's another. To me, I'm just like, we have to have some humanity that goes. There isn't always going to be someone that you're going to be able to hang in the city town center. And that's what I think is just so upsetting about sometimes when we point the fingers to anybody we can try to, because the actual person who's responsible for it cannot be charged. And then you start going after these parents, and it's like, is there some instances where it is egregious? Yeah. If your child tells you, listen, I hate school, I'm going to shoot up the school. And then for his next birthday, you hand him a gun and he's like, I'm going to shoot up the school, Mom. And you do nothing about it.
That's
and we have evidence of that. I would say, all right, you gave him the gun. You knew he was going to do it. I think you have some culpability there. But that's not always what it looks like. It's much more of a vague issue. It's much more when people are like, they had a gun in the house they didn't keep locked up, so we should start charging parents for those people who then their kid takes the gun and goes to school. It's like, it's because of the fact that that guy ends up getting killed by the police or whatever during the school shooting. But it's like, at some point, we've got to look at it and go, okay, where does the line stop of who we're going to point the fingers at? You know, do you point the fingers at the preserve that created this whole place where people could go and murder people in the woods and nobody would find them until long later, you know? I'm just not always a fan of that.
And it makes me think of, like, where do we draw the line? Because on one hand, you know, with the newest generation, right?
Yeah.
We all have autonomy. We're all our own independent being.
Yeah.
These are how we like to be addressed. This is what I believe. Respect that. Whatever. Treat me as an individual. But then on the flip side of the coin, after something egregious does happen. And in this circumstance, like you just spelled out, why do we still have to go after somebody else to feel vindicated for this act?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like a constant two-sided hypocrisy almost.
Yeah.
Bella, I know. I'm done.
Well, yes.
Thank you, Bella.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And like we said before, it's just a heartbreaking situation. If you have been a victim of domestic violence, please reach out for help. And, you know, there's a lot of hotlines you can call. There's people that you can look to for advice and assistance, and you're not alone. And in this instance, you know, it's heartbreaking that such a young life was just lost so senselessly as it seems. And a fear realized for her parents, which I had tears in my eyes thinking about it. I was just like, I can't imagine. And I think when the mom explained what it was like when she knew, you know, there's always going to be that moment when they know. And they said that the moment that they knew was when they got the phone call from the detective, when the officers were outside of Brian's parents' house, and they said that the van was there. And she wasn't there. And I think they absolutely knew then. And to think that what they were trying to do was search for a body at that point in time, that little teeny body is just, I mean, I can't even imagine what it felt like for them. So our hearts and prayers and strength goes out to her family members at this point in time. And hopefully, you know, they have a bill that's been passed. The new bill is, in essence, requiring that officers ask 11 specific questions that could potentially have prevented this. I think it's ridiculous. I don't believe it was anything the officers did. This concept of bills being passed after somebody died is just a way to look like we're doing a lot of stuff sometimes. But there are times we make changes. But in this instance, I don't think a change was needed to any type of requirement of what an officer asked or not. What I would hope is every officer would look at that video and remember their humanity needs to be involved in every situation, and know that we support them at times when like this happens and it's difficult to make a decision.
I do feel like a little shred of silver lining, though, is the visibility it brought to this kind of missing persons case and stuff. In I know there was a lot of the indigenous
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah.
And at first, whenever they opened up her
Yeah.
fund, her charity, her father, I remember, I believe, her father was saying, you know, I was really upset because they were like, well, if it's a little white woman on the TV, it mass, you know, everybody, bring Shorty and the boys. But then he was like, no, it's so true. We do need to have more visibility on these cases. So I do feel like in her honor, that's a beautiful thing that has kind of brought it to our attention, because otherwise we wouldn't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, join us next time for Legal Candy. Thank you for tuning in.